Alphabet shareholders have voted down a proposal to tie executive pay to progress on workplace diversity. The proposal was presented at the company's annual shareholder meeting in Mountain View, California. Employees of Alphabet's Google teamed up with investors in a push to close the current gender pay gap. In a rare turn of events, Google employees have criticized the company for not doing enough to address workplace harassment and have backed a petition to create better policies and procedures. Here to discuss the surprising outcome of this meeting, Trigg, CMO of the recruiting tech firm Entelo. Also with us, Bloomberg Technology's Mark Bergen, who covers all things Alphabet. So, Mark, talk to us about how this vote went down.
Yeah, this was a rare to have Google employees stand before the executive for the shareholder meeting. Typically, you have activist investors that stand up, and the sort of routine pattern is the investors will submit proposals, and they're often voted down. They're almost always voted down. And we have, because the company is very tightly controlled by the founders. The same thing this morning, the employees put forward the proposal about tying management and executive pay to diversity metrics. They also, as you mentioned, raised these concerns about harassment, but that proposal was voted down.
And the Department of Labor has an ongoing investigation into Google Pay, correct? What is the status of that?
Yeah, that's still pending. Google's kind of been hitting on all sides, right? There's a case that former female employees have brought about around gender pay. There's also the case that James Damore, the former engineer, brought about the opposite, that Google was Google's discriminating against white men, and that following the very next question this morning after the employee spoke was a shareholder proposal about that Google's biased against conservatives.
Now, Mike.
Yes.
Shareholders often vote down proposals at shareholder meetings, and yet you have other companies like Intel, Microsoft, Qualcomm, IBM that are doing much more to tie gender pay to executive performance, executive compensation. What do you make of this?
Well, first thing is that it's clearly a very topical issue, not just within tech companies, but across the board. This is something that I think it's great that the organizations you cited are being proactive about. And I think the vote with Google's board today shows how important it is at Google. This was an employee-driven initiative to really get this in front of the organization. And I think it's wonderful to see that.
But they voted it down. This is a company where the founders, Larry and Sergey, have a lot of voting power.
Sure.
We don't know for sure if they didn't have as much voting power, if this would have, in fact, been approved. Do you think the founder control at technology companies in particular is a problem?
Well, it's hard for me to comment about Google's structure specifically, but I think that, as Mark pointed out, Google's getting lawsuits on both sides of this issue. And so I'm sure their board's taking that into consideration and really trying to, do the right thing for their organization.
Mark, what is Google saying about how they might address this otherwise?
Yeah, they said this morning they're certainly going to take this into consideration. They talked about even how their board itself is not that diverse, and they're going to work on certain metrics in the next few years to both diversify their workforce and the board. I think typically with these measures, Google likes to do things on their own terms rather than sort of dictated by what they see as activist shareholders or proposals even outside the company.
Interestingly, at Amazon a few weeks ago, there was a proposal that Amazon be required to interview a diverse slate of directors when choosing new board members. Amazon rejected it. Employees protested, and Amazon a few days later said, okay, we'll do it. Mike, what sort of data are you seeing about the gender pay gap in Silicon Valley specifically? I've seen data that it's 5 times the national average in Silicon Valley.
It's pronounced. It's clearly an issue here in Silicon Valley, and this is an area where Entelo has done analysis of our candidate database and looked at those gaps that are there, not just in terms of wage gaps, but just representation gaps. Women in tech roles are underrepresented. They only represent about 20% of the workforce in technology companies, and you see that diminish as the seniority within those tech roles increases. So at the senior exec level, it's only 10%. And so I think that's those statistics back up why this is such an important topic for companies to address, not only at their executive level, but at every level in the organization.
And you do have other executives out there like Salesforce CEO Mark Benioff. They did a 2-year process to get their pay gap closed. Mark, talk to us about the other significant points at this shareholder meeting. A lot of issues came up.
Right. I mean, the biggest issue right now for the company actually didn't come up at the shareholder meeting at all. Last week they said they're not going to renew a cloud contract they have with the Pentagon after some pretty sizable employee protests. Google's putting out an ethical AI charter this week. They hope that will address that. I've never really seen so many employees. We've seen them out on Twitter, and at the shareholder meeting, very vocal about concerns. They're addressing. A lot of them are saying they don't want their technology used in military applications, and they're saying that they feel harassed. The shareholder meeting this morning, the engineer brought up the issue that this is really detracting from productivity, and they said that these issues are keeping us from being the best performing workers that we are.
Meantime, Mark, a news story in the FT saying that the EU is poised to give Alphabet, Google, a hefty fine as a result of its Android investigation. Tell us more.
Yeah, they're really being hit on all sides today. This is the second of 3 existing investigations that the EU has around Google for antitrust and dominance. This one, we reported that Google is most concerned about this, even more so than the shopping case they were fined for last summer, or the other ones on advertising. This is the crux of what Google makes them very successful on mobile, right? They're able to get the Android operating system out to 80% of the world's smartphones, and that has Google Search, that has Maps, that has all its services. The biggest concern here is less of I think for investors, is less a fine, which Google could handle, and some sort of structural changes to how they operate Android.
All right. Mark Bergeron of Bloomberg Tech, who covers Alphabet for us, as well as Mike Trigg, CMO of Entelo. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That does it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. From San Francisco, I'm Emily Chang. This is Bloomberg.